Jack Turner lunges down the slippery bank, mud splashing around his boots as the python's coils crush tighter around pregnant Bobcat. He grips a heavy branch and swings with everything he has, striking the snake again and again. The serpent recoils, loosening just enough for pregnant Bobcat to pull free, gasping and trembling, but alive. Her newborn pressed beneath her trembling chest. He thought the swamp would stay quiet that morning. Dawn smeared pale gold along the cypress crowns, while mist clung low, turning every stump into a ghost and every pool into a secret. Jack Turner walked the warped boardwalk behind his cabin with a dented thermos in hand, Scout at his heel, breath fogging in the cool Georgia air. Most mornings he checked his trail cameras in an easy silence, letting frogs, owls, and far-off herons do the talking for a world that no longer demanded words from him. The Okefenokee had its own slow heartbeat, steady and honest, so different from hospital corridors and sterile light. Here, the quiet felt less like absence and more like mercy. Scout's ears caught the change before Jack did. The old dog stopped mid-step, nose lifted, one paw hanging above the damp wood, as if the swamp itself had whispered halt. Jack followed his gaze through the shredded veil of fog toward a break in the reeds, where something moved low and careful. Smoke, remembering it, used to be muscle and bone. It was a bobcat. Lean shoulders rippled beneath a mottled coat beaded with dew. Every step placed like she knew exactly what would kill her if she slipped. She eased forward until the thin light brushed her whiskers and the pale tufts at her cheeks. Her sides rose and fell too hard, belly round and tight. She was carrying more than her own survival now. Jack slowed without meaning to, as if any sharp breath might fracture the fragile distance between them. The bobcat stood still, head high, ears twitching at sounds he couldn't hear, gathering every scent and shadow. Then she chose a shallow dip beneath a twisted cypress root, a cradle of mud, leaf mold, and roots tangled like protective fingers. Through the drifting fog, he felt the world narrow around her. No fences, no asphalt, no rules printed on clipboards. Just water, moss, breath, and a ticking clock inside her ribs, counting down to lives that would belong to no one. She stepped into the hollow, paws kneading once at the soft earth, and disappeared as the reeds folded back over her. Jack lifted his binoculars, not from habit, but from a quiet need to bear witness. The glass sliced the mist into layers, searching for the curve of her spine, the flick of an ear. At first he saw only tannin-dark water and the silver flash of a heron's wing. Then she emerged in the frame again, crouched low, her flanks shuddering with contained effort. She was beautiful in a rough, necessary way, all bone and resolve, no softness wasted. Mud streaked her fur as another contraction rolled through, pulling her inward. This was the secret war of the wild, the part no one applauded, where a body decided, alone, who would join the world and who would slip away before anyone learned a name. Scout rumbled, a low sound that vibrated through Jack's palm when he reached down to steady him. Not warning, not fear, just recognition that something fragile was happening. Easy, boy, Jack murmured. Even the insects seemed to fall quiet. The swamp held its breath. Branches leaned closer, air thickening around that hidden, hollow-like cupped hands. The bobcat's ears pinned back. Her golden eyes shifted past her own pain toward the black ribbon of water and reed beyond. Jack followed her gaze and saw it too, a glossy curve sliding low. Slow, deliberate. At first it mimicked a drowned limb or loose bark, until it flexed with too much purpose to belong to any fallen tree. It moved closer to the hollow where she laboured, patient as a bad thought, hugging the shadow line. The bobcat shifted her weight, torn between the fierce command to run and the heavier one inside her that would not wait. Her tail flicked once, claws digging into mud. A strip of scaled muscle caught a thin nerve of light and vanished again. Jack lowered the binoculars, pulse landing hard against his ribs. Scout whined, toenails scraping the planks. Down in the reeds, the pregnant bobcat did not flee. She rose just enough to cover the unseen nest beneath her, sides heaving, eyes locked on the dark coil, easing closer. For one suspended heartbeat, the whole swamp went still with her. Mist peeled back as the sun lifted a little higher, spilling a softer light over the reeds, as if trying to pretend nothing was wrong. The pregnant bobcat held her ground in the hollow, breath coming in short, broken pause. Her body understood there was no more time to move. The danger slid closer, but so did the lives inside her, demanding to be born. The python rode the edge of the water, scales catching thin flashes of morning, a silent blade wrapped in its own patience. It had followed scent and heat, drawn to the trembling warmth beneath the root. The bobcat watched, chest heaving, belly tight and hard beneath matted fur. One instinct screamed to flee. The deeper one, older than fear, said, "Stay." Jack saw the shape fully now through his binoculars, and his stomach clenched. Scout's growl vibrated against the boards. Down in the hollow, the bobcat shifted to shield the nest that did not yet exist. planting her paws as if her small frame could hold back a world that wanted to close its fist. She was alone. No mate. No backup. Only ribs, claws, and will. The python slipped from water to mud with barely a sound. Its body coiled in slow motion, gathering around the base of the cypress like a rope remembering its purpose. The air thickened. Sounds of the swamp falling away in cautious retreat. The bobcat flattened her ears and bared her teeth. But another contraction ripped through her, dragging her inward, stealing precious air. Her hindquarters trembled as pain climbed her spine. She tried to step away, stumbled, then circled back to the hollow as if tethered. The python read the weakness, its head lifting, tongue tasting the scent of blood and strain. It moved with a calm that bordered on cruel, curving toward her flank. She hissed, but the sound broke halfway, tangled with a groan. When the snake struck, it did not bite. It wrapped. Muscle slid over muscle, looping across her back, under her ribs, tightening like a closing hand. The first squeeze stole her breath. Her claws lashed, catching only slick scale. She twisted, but the weight pinned her, pressing her heaving belly against the earth that waited for whatever would fall from her body next. Jack cursed under his breath, old training clashing with the raw sight below. He knew the rules carved into policy and conscience. Let the wild choose. From the boardwalk, his fingers dug into the railing until his knuckles blanched. But his feet stayed rooted. In the hollow, the bobcat's eyes blew wide, not in surrender, but in a furious, silent refusal to vanish. The python tightened, bones creaked. Her vision narrowed to streaks of light and shadow. Somewhere inside that crushing ring, life still pushed forward, stubborn, unaware of predators or rules. She forced air into her lungs, forced a snarl out past the pressure. It came out ragged but real, a sound that said this was not finished, not yet. Then the first cub slid free, slick and small in the mud beneath her. The python's coils shifted with her convulsion, almost crushing down on both bodies at once. The mother jerked, trying to curl around what she couldn't see, claws raking trenches into the wet earth. The newborn's chest fluttered. No sound, just a weak, failing reach for air. A second squeeze rolled through her, brutal and steady. Her vision flashed white at the edges. Jack saw the small shape twitch, saw her try to drag herself between the coils to reach it. Every breath she struggled for seemed stolen from the tiny body at her feet. The python angled its head, lining up with the more convenient prize, 2 lives pinned in one place. Then it came. A thin, piercing cry tore loose from the newborn, high and improbable, cutting through mud, mist, and muscle. It was too small a sound to stop a predator, yet it split the quiet like lightning. The bobcat's head snapped down. That desperate note hooked itself into her, yanking her from the blur of suffocation back into savage clarity. Her paws slammed down, claws driving into scale. For an instant, even the python hesitated. The cry carried up through the reeds to where Jack stood, slicing straight through everything lectures had ever told him. That sound did what reason hadn't. It broke the distance. As the mother bobcat thrashed beneath the coils, eyes locked on the tiny, crying thing in the mud, he felt the choice close around his own chest, just as tight as any snake. The swamp did not roar or thunder in answer. It simply listened, holding that cry in its tangled branches. The python adjusted, starting to squeeze again. The bobcat, bruised and gasping, dragged one paw forward, just enough to brush her cub's side. The contact steadied the sound. Jack stepped off the boardwalk at last, heart pounding, as the echo of that fragile cry threaded through the woods and refused to fade. Jack moved through the reeds as if the water itself might shout at him. Each step sank into black mud that tried to hold him back, sucking at his boots. Scout splashed ahead, low and tense, a growl stuck in his throat. Down in the hollow, the python's coils pulsed, drawing tighter around the bobcat and the crying bundle beneath her ribs. The mother bobcat's vision blurred, but not enough to lose that sound. The cub's thin cry snagged in the air like a hook in fabric, refusing to tear. She twisted against the crushing weight, muscles screaming, claws dragging through mud and root. Her body was being claimed from the outside and from within, and still she clawed toward that voice. Jack slid down the bank and nearly went to his knees. He saw her up close now, ribs bowed, fur soaked, eyes blown wide with pain and fury. The python's thick body looped across her spine. Another coil slithering toward the cub in the mud. For one breath he froze. This was the line he swore he'd never cross again. And then Scout lunged first. The old dog snapped at the snake's tail, teeth scraping scale. The python whipped back, loosening just enough for the bobcat to wrench one shoulder free. She struck not at the man, not at the dog, but at the true enemy, jaws sinking into the python's neck with a desperate, tearing bite that came from somewhere beyond fear. The hollow exploded into motion. Jack threw himself forward, one hand grabbing a fallen limb, the other fumbling for the knife at his belt. The python recoiled, tail lashing, loops tightening again. Its head swung towards Scout, jaws yawning. Jack slammed the branch down across its neck, wood cracking, the impact shuddering up his arm. Pinned for half a heartbeat, the python thrashed, coils grinding into the bobcat's sides. She cried out, the sound raw and jagged, but used the sliver of slack. With a jerk of torn muscle, she dragged her front half over the mud, spreading herself between the cub and the coiled weight, claws raking, blood streaking the reeds in uneven arcs. Jack's knife finally found flesh. He drove the blade along the thick curve just behind the head. Not clean, not perfect, but enough. Hot, dark blood slicked his hand. The python spasmed, twisting its power in every direction at once. One coil clipped Jack's legs and knocked him sideways. Another punched into the hollow, nearly covering the cub. The tiny body squealed again, higher, shocked by the wash of cold and shadow. That cry shot through the mother like fire. With a savage burst, she tore free from the loosening ring and launched herself at the snake's ruined head. Claws and teeth working in a blur. There was nothing graceful left. Only a mother dismantling the thing that had tried to erase her. The python let go. Its body unwound in ugly, heavy waves, sliding back toward the water, leaving churned earth and streaks of red. Scout backed off, chest heaving. Jack staggered to his feet, lungs burning, ears full of the rush of his own blood. The swamp slowly began to breathe again around them, as if someone had lifted a weight from its throat. The bobcat stood trembling over her cub, sides heaving, paws spread to shield him from everything, even the man who had helped save them. Her eyes locked on Jack, wild and unblinking, a warning edged with exhausted gratitude. Mud clung to her belly, blood to her whiskers. She bent to nudge the cub with her nose, urging him closer to her warmth. For a long moment, no one moved. Jack did not step closer. He watched the cub shiver and curl against her chest, watched her force her battered body into a sheltering shape. The silence felt different now, less like terror, more like a held breath that might yet release as life instead of loss. The storm of motion narrowed into the tiny sound of the cub suckling. A breeze slipped through the cypress knees, stirring a faint ripple across the dark water where the python had vanished. The swamp resumed its slow chorus, distant heron. Drip of moss-heavy branches. Scout's panting softening into quiet. Jack wiped his bloody hand on his jeans, not trusting himself to speak or to name what he'd just done. The mother bobcat did not thank him, and he did not expect her to. Her duty had not ended. It had only survived one terrible test. She pressed her nose to the cub once more, her body sagging but unbroken. Overhead, the light shifted, warm against the reeds, and for a fragile, borrowed moment, the woods knew only this, against all odds. They were both still here. For a while after the struggle, the swamp moved gently, as if trying to tuck the chaos back under its green skin. The python's trail bled into the dark water. Over the hollow, the air hung heavy with iron and wet earth. The bobcat mother stayed standing longer than her body could afford, legs locked, breath rattling shallow in her chest. The cub pressed blindly against her, still slick with birth and mud, his cry soft now, more question than alarm. She lowered her head and began to clean him with slow, deliberate strokes, tongue rasping through fur that would not yet fluff. Each pass was a promise she wasn't certain she could keep, but instinct didn't ask her to be sure, only to try. Pain moved through her in waves, slower than before, but colder, curling up from the places the python had bruised and crushed. One pulse of weakness slid her weight sideways. She caught herself, claws digging into the churned soil. Jack watched from the edge of the hollow, seeing the tremor in her shoulders, the way her ribs flared unevenly. He knew that pattern too well, the quiet failing that came after the violence. When everyone else thought the danger had passed, the mother bobcat blinked toward him, pupils narrow in the thin light. There was no plea there, no trust, only the sharp, exhausted awareness of another presence too close to her last and only thing. She shifted to shelter the cub further from his gaze. Her lungs fought for depth that would not come. Each breath scraped. A red foam touched the edge of her lip, tasting like goodbye. Still, when the cub mewed, she answered. She nudged him closer to the warmth beneath her torn chest, a shield of bone and fur that defied its own cracking. The swamp hummed low, cicadas picking up a slow dirge. Jack stepped closer, stopping where her ears twitched in warning. He saw the rise and fall of her sides falter, saw the stubborn fire behind her eyes burn against a wind she couldn't outclaw. Somewhere under his ribs, an old ache stirred. Heavy as the day, a small human hand slipped from his in a white room that smelled like bleach. Not mud, The bobcat's gaze flicked, just once, between her cub and the man. It was not comprehension, not language, but something narrower, like a bridge built from the raw edge of necessity. She lowered her head and touched her nose to the cub's spine, drawing in his scent as if to carve it into whatever came next. A low sound trembled in her throat. Her legs finally folded. She sank carefully, choosing even in collapse not to crush the tiny body at her feet. The cub squeaked, then climbed clumsily toward her chest, paws kneading at fur that no longer hid steady strength. She tried to curl around him one last time. The effort shook her. Her eyes found Jack again, unfocused now, gold dimming around the edges. Scout whined softly behind him, feeling the shape of what hovered between staying and leaving. Jack's fingers curled and uncurled uselessly at his sides. He knew he couldn't fix the damage snaked around her ribs. Too deep. Too late. The only thing left to choose was whether the small life pressed against her would follow. The thought clawed open the old wound of Ellie's empty bed. The bobcat exhaled a shuddering breath and did not pull another in. For a heartbeat, her body remained the same shape, the same shelter. Then something subtle eased out of her, and the hollow felt wider. The cub butted at her chin, confused by the sudden stillness where warmth had been. No answer came. The swamp, respectful, went quiet. Jack moved then, slow, open, hands visible, as if she could still see and judge his approach. He knelt in the mud across from her, close enough to trace the pattern of her spots, to see where his knife and her teeth had bought this fragile victory. "You did everything," he whispered, the words meant for her, for another time, for another small body he hadn't managed to save. He reached toward the cub. The tiny creature hissed on reflex, a thin, broken sound, then staggered, sides fluttering. Jack hesitated only a second. The wild had taken its due from the mother. Letting it take the child too felt less like balance and more like abandonment. His hands were gentle but firm as he lifted the cub from the cooling fur. In his palms, the bobcat kitten weighed almost nothing bone. Breath, and that stubborn little cry that had once split the morning open. Jack held him close against his chest, where his own heart hammered loud enough to be a promise. Behind him, the mother lay draped in the soft light, forever keeping her place at the edge of the hollow. Ahead, the path back to the cabin waited, narrow and uncertain, but still there. The cabin met them in the fading light, a square of warm colour against the creeping blue of the swamp. Jack pushed the door open with his shoulder, holding the tiny bobcat tight against his chest. Scout slipped in first, circling once as if checking the room for ghosts. The air smelled of old coffee, pine smoke, and a life lived mostly in quiet. He laid the kitten in a worn flannel shirt beside the wood stove, hands moving with the shaky precision of someone who'd failed before and refused to again. The cub's sides fluttered too fast, tiny claws flexing at nothing. His fur still held the damp scent of mud and blood, and his mother's fading warmth. A story half finished, refusing its last page. Jack lit the fire higher, feeding in dry splits until orange climbed the brick. Heat rolled out slow. He filled a dropper with formula he kept for injured raccoons and stray litters the swamp sometimes surrendered. When he touched it to the cub's mouth, there was no reaction at first, just a thin tremor, a stubborn clinging to the edge. Then, as if some invisible thread tugged him back, the kitten's tongue flicked. One swallow, weak and careless. Jack let out a breath he hadn't known he'd been strangling. Scout lay down, facing the bundle, chin on his paws, eyes unblinking. The dog seemed to understand this small thing was now part of the room's gravity. The cub tried to lift his head and failed, collapsing into the curve of the shirt. Jack watched every movement. Measuring it against memories, he couldn't help but replay the pale hospital sheets. The stillness that came too soon. He pushed those images away and focused on the present, one breath. Then another, a fragile chest refusing to go quiet. Morning found them all where exhaustion left them. Jack jerked awake in the chair beside the stove. The coals glowed low. The kitten lay unnervingly still. For a heartbeat, ice washed through him. He reached down, fingers hovering, afraid to confirm what silence suggested. Then the cub's paw twitched, pressing faintly at the air. Seeking, Jack warmed the formula again, slower this time, talking under his breath like the words might stitch the cub closer to this side. The kitten latched clumsily, swallowed with a little more intent. After, he burrowed nose first into the fold of cloth, chasing heat, the way he'd once chased his mother's ribs. Jack touched one careful finger to his back. Willow, he said softly. The name settled easily. This tiny life had been born beneath twisted roots and hanging moss, caught between drowning and light. Willow fit a thing that bends and does not quite break. Scout gave a quiet huff, as if approving the choice. Outside, the swamp stretched awake. unaware that one of its children now borrowed human fire to keep breathing. The knock on the cabin door came near midday, sharp against the drifting calm. Riley Morgan stepped inside without waiting. Boots stamped, badge half hidden under her jacket. Her eyes landed on Willow by the stove, then on Jack's sleepless face. "You know this is a wild cat," she said, voice low, more tired than accusing. Jack didn't deny it. He just shifted slightly, putting himself between Riley and the bundle. He told her about the python, the fight, the mother's last breath. Riley listened, jaw tight, glancing toward the window where cypress shadows cut the light. "Protocol says you should have left him," she muttered. But something in her gaze softened at the kitten's unsteady stirring. The cub let out a tiny, hoarse sound then, a ghost of the cry that had split the swamp. It turned both their heads. Riley stepped closer despite herself, watching Willow's ribs flutter. The stubborn pulse of life almost too small to see. "If they find out," she warned, "they'll make you turn him over. You know what that usually means." Jack just nodded once. He knew. That night, the fear circled close. Willow's breathing hitched, shallow and ragged. His body went limp, as if the weight of staying was finally too much. Jack held him in both hands beside the stove, rubbing gently along his sides, whispering promises no wild thing had asked to hear. Scout pressed in close, nose nudging the kitten's paw like he could push warmth back in. For a long, aching stretch, nothing changed. Then Willow shuddered, coughed once, and pulled in a deeper breath. Thin but real. His paw opened, resting against Jack's thumb. The fire popped softly, sending up a brief tower of sparks. The crisis eased its grip. In the small cabin carved from regret and second chances, one more life chose to stay a little longer. Days settled into a slow circle of feeding, cleaning, and watching Willow learn how to belong to a world he'd almost missed. The kitten tottered along the braided rug, tripping over his own oversized paws, then collapsing in a patch of sunlight like a dropped leaf. Jack's days, once hollow, began to move to that small, clumsy rhythm. Willow grew, but not evenly. His legs were a little shaky, his breath sometimes catching when he played too hard. He'd scramble up Jack's pant leg, claws finding denim, then freeze halfway. Surprised at his own nerve, Scout tolerated him with the weary patience of the old, shifting only when tiny teeth tested his tail one step too far. At night, When the swamp pressed close against the cabin walls, Jack would wake to soft sounds, the kitten's rough purr, the scrape of claws on the crate, the kind of restless dreaming only the very young and the very haunted seem to share. Sometimes, for just a moment, he heard Ellie's laugh laid over that sound, and it scared him how much he wanted to. Riley came by more often than her patrol schedule truly required. She brought field reports, cheap coffee, and a stack of forms she never quite pushed across the table. Instead, she'd end up crouched near the stove, watching Willow stalk a thread as if it were prey that might end the world. "He's wild," she would remind Jack, but less like a warning, more like a question. Word drifted anyway. A biologist from the state left a message. A regional supervisor emailed. On one grey afternoon, Riley stood in the doorway and said, "They're asking what you're keeping out here." Jack didn't lie. "A chance," he answered. Her shoulders dropped, caught between badge and friendship. They won't like that answer. Outside, the swamp had its own opinions. Burmese pythons, dumped and forgotten, were starting to slip into places they didn't belong. Tracks showed up where they hadn't last year. A raccoon carcass, half swallowed, turned up along the canal. Riley spread the photos on Jack's table. "They're going to say we can't pick favourites," she said quietly. "Not even the ones with spots." That night, the rain came hard, turning the yard into mirror black water. Willow pressed his nose to the window, pupils wide, fascinated by the streaks of light and motion. Jack watched him watching the storm. Feeling the tug-of-war tighten, the stronger the kitten became. The clearer it was that he didn't fit inside four walls forever. Mercy had an expiration date. He could feel it coming. Near midnight, Scout snapped awake with a bark that carried no confusion at all. Jack followed his gaze to the lower edge of the glass, where something thick and pale moved just beyond the port. He killed the lamp. In the thin wash of moon between clouds, a python's body slid across the boards with slow, dreadful certainty, tasting the warm scent that leaked from the cabin. Willow bristled, a tiny ridge down his spine. A kitten trying on the shape of the predator he was born to be. He had no idea what waited outside that door. Only that something challenged the safety of his narrow world. Jack stepped between him and the dark, one hand dropping to Scout's collar, the other reaching for the old shotgun he kept mostly for snakes and memories. He didn't open the door. He didn't need to. The python lingered at the threshold, tongue flicking, reading wood, heat, and history. For a long, careful moment, it lay coiled just beyond the frame, a living echo of the morning that had rewritten everything. Jack's grip tightened. One pull would end it. One shot could satisfy every savage. Grieving urge he still carried. But Willow's small body brushed his ankle then, weaving instinctively closer, trusting him without ceremony. The choice sharpened, blood or boundary. Jack raised the gun, sighted along the barrel, then slowly lowered it again. "Not this way," he muttered. The snake slid off the boards and back into the dark water. Indifferent to his decision, the danger didn't vanish. It moved. Riley came at first light, called by a message Jack hadn't realized he'd left. They tracked the python's trail to the reeds, marked its direction, logged it for the record. She studied him for a long second. "You could have killed it," she said. "You didn't." Jack's eyes went to Willow, tumbling after a moth in the doorway. "I'm done letting rage pick my targets." As the sun climbed, the cabin felt different, no safer. Not really, but clearer. Keeping Willow meant standing in the crossfire between rules written for balance and a heart that refused to stand aside when one small life cried out. The price of mercy wasn't just fines or paperwork. It was knowing that one day, to truly honor what he'd saved, Jack would have to let it go. For now, the kitten slept in the warm square of light, and that was enough. Spring bled softly into summer, the kind of change the swamp didn't announce but simply allowed. The waterline sank a little lower each day, and the air filled with dragonflies instead of fog. Willow had grown into a lean, bright-limbed shadow of what had been a survivor learning how to move without fear. Jack watched it all with the quiet ache of someone counting backward from goodbye. The kitten's paws had found strength. He could scale the porch railing now, leaping from plank to post in proud bursts of agility, landing with a thump that startled even himself. Scout followed his antics with tolerant eyes, a guardian tired of chasing youth. When Willow toppled into the grass, Jack laughed under his breath, a sound that felt like it belonged to someone younger. Inside, the house had begun to shrink around the cat. He paced more often near the door, nose pressed to the crack, tail twitching. The swamp called to him in a voice older than any man's claim. Jack felt that pull too. In the pit of his stomach, a reminder that mercy and ownership were never the same thing. Love could hold, but not cage. Riley stopped by one humid afternoon, sweat marking the edge of her collar. "He's almost ready," she said, scanning the way Willow's shoulders rolled when he walked. Jack didn't argue. She studied his face, searching for resistance, maybe hoping to find it. You can't keep him, Jack. Not without hurting him. He nodded. A small, defeated motion. I know. That night, he stayed up longer than usual, sorting through memories he didn't know he'd been storing. The first weak cry, the fevered nights, the endless fear that each dawn would find him gone. Willow slept near the stove, curled small but no longer fragile. Jack wrote one line in his notebook. Some lives only visit to remind you how to care again. He closed it gently. Morning came golden and too soon. Jack loaded the truck with the travel crate, a soft blanket, and silence. Willow resisted the box at first, claws catching fabric, eyes wide with distrust. Easy, kid, Jack murmured, voice steady though his chest felt hollow. Once inside, the cat settled, curling into himself, ears twitching to every sound the world made beyond him. The drive was long, winding through cypress shadows and sun-dappled clearings where light looked old. Riley met him at the edge of the wildlife reserve, clipboard in hand, though she didn't write anything down. Out here he'll have a chance, she said quietly. No roads, no trappers, no tourists. Jack stared out at the endless green and thought, and no me. He carried the crate to a patch of high ground near a stand of oaks. When he opened the door, Willow didn't bolt. He stepped out cautiously, paws sinking into the moss. Every sense stretched wide. The air smelled like the beginning of something. He turned once, looking back at the man who had rebuilt his world from warmth and milk and borrowed faith. Jack crouched low, meeting the animal's gaze at its level. Your cry started all this, he said softly. Let it end in peace. Willow blinked once, slow and certain, then walked forward until sunlight caught his fur, flashing it gold and white. He melted into the underbrush without sound. Jack waited, listening for the faintest rustle, but there was only stillness. The emptiness hit harder than he expected. Every sound on the trail seemed to echo the slap of mud on his boots, the buzz of insects. Even Scout's laboured panting. Riley walked a few paces behind, saying nothing. The wind shifted once, and for a heartbeat he swore he heard that same thin cry. Not of fear this time, but of distance. He smiled through the sting in his eyes. Back at the cabin, the world looked unchanged, but lighter somehow. The porch felt bigger without the crate, the air easier to breathe. Scout found his old spot by the stove and sighed as if the long story of their days had finally exhaled too. Jack poured himself coffee, let it go cold, and watched the tree line for movement he didn't expect to see. When twilight came, he stepped outside and listened. The swamp hummed with its patient chorus, 1,000 lives folding into the rhythm of night. Somewhere out there, a young bobcat was learning the weight of his own steps, tracing paths older than memory. Jack lifted his head to the darkening sky and whispered, "Good luck, Willow." The wind carried it, as if delivering the words to where they belong. Years passed, like water moving through reeds, slow, unhurried, carving new channels through old ground. The swamp stayed the same in its way, green and secretive, but time softened everything else. Jack's hair silvered. Scout's muzzle turned white. The cabin leaned a little more each season, as if bowing to the weight of memory. Most mornings, Jack still walked the narrow boardwalk, the same one that had once led him to chaos and mercy. The boards creaked beneath his boots, the air thick with the smell of cypress and rain. He carried no camera now, no notebook, only a mug of coffee and the quiet company of habit. The world didn't ask for more than that. Sometimes, when fog hugged the ground, he thought he heard movement through the brush, a low rustle, a footfall too light for deer. He would pause, breath held, eyes searching the tangled roots. Nothing ever showed. Only wind, only imagination, only the ache of wanting to believe the wild still remembered his name. One evening, the sky broke open with spring rain. Jack sat by the window, watching droplets race down the glass. The air trembled with thunder, deep and slow. Scout lay at his feet, asleep but dreaming, paws twitching against a memory of chase. The storm's rhythm lulled him until a sound cut through the noise high. Sharp, unmistakable, a cry. He froze. It wasn't wind or owl. It was that same haunting note that once pierced the swamp years ago. A kitten's call turned older, deeper, the kind of sound that carried a shape inside it. He set the mug down, heart thudding, and opened the door. Rain met him head on, warm and relentless, the world awash in silver. At first, he saw only shadows. Then a figure appeared between the trees, low and smooth, moving with a calm that belonged to no domesticated thing. A bobcat, full grown, coat brushed with grey and faint streaks of white at the throat, Willow. She stepped into the clearing, water slicking her fur, golden eyes fixed on him through the rain. Jack didn't move. He didn't dare. The years between them collapsed into a single breath. She looked stronger now, heavier in the shoulders, But the quiet defiance was the same. Behind her, two smaller shapes tumbled from cover young bobcats, their spots still bold. One with a pale ring around its neck that caught the fading light. The sight hollowed him and filled him all at once. Willow glanced back at her offspring, then turned toward Jack again, head tilted just slightly. There was no fear, no debt, only recognition. A soft rumble rolled from her chest, almost lost beneath the rain. The sound struck something deep in him, the place where grief and gratitude had finally learned to share a room. He whispered her name, though the storm nearly swallowed it. Willow. The word was half prayer, half apology. She blinked, unbothered by language, then took one careful step forward, close enough that he could see the water bead on her whiskers. One of the cubs mewed behind her, a faint echo of the first cry that had once rewritten his life. Jack's eyes blurred, rain and memory mixing until he couldn't tell one from the other. He smiled, small and trembling, the kind that carried no regret. "You did good," he said softly. Willow's ears twitched. For a moment, it felt like she understood. Then she turned, brushed her nose against one cub, and melted back into the trees, leaving only ripples of sound. He stood there long after she vanished, rain soaking through his shirt, heart still racing. The swamp hummed low and steady again, as if settling around a secret too old to disturb. Scout nudged his leg, breaking the spell, urging him inside. Jack followed, closing the door gently, his face lit by the soft flicker of the stove. Later that night, he wrote one final line in his notebook. The paper wrinkled from damp hands. Kindness doesn't echo in words. It echoes in cries, in steps, in lives that find their way back. He set the pen down and leaned back, the kind of tired that feels like peace. Outside, the rain eased, and somewhere deep in the woods, a cry rose once more, steady, alive, and free. If this story touched your heart, just drop a 1 in the comments, or a 0 if it stayed quiet inside you. Don't forget to subscribe. There are more gentle stories waiting just beyond the trees.